and cause us to lose our homes and families? It's not the farmer down the road. It's the politician. It's the landowner. It's the city councilman. It's the nobility. They're the one causing the pressure. Even think in our days. Now you think about those who would love to squash the freedoms that we enjoy. The freedoms that we're celebrating actually this week. One of them being the freedom of religion and being able to worship and talk about Jesus freely. You think about all of those, and you can just use an organization like ACLU, and I don't know any individuals in there, but you look at an organization as a whole, it's basically anti-Christian. You look at people like that who would love to bring legislation against the church and would love to see the church limited and sued and made extremely difficult. You know who it is? It's usually the academia or the wealthy or those in politics. It's not Bob who works on your car. It's not Sam the plumber. It's not the cashier at 7-Eleven. It's people with money and power and influence, and they would love to limit the freedoms. It's been that way all through history. We happen to enjoy an unprecedented amount of freedom. But you go to places like China, where I was for 3 weeks last summer, where Mike was last year, it's incredibly oppressed, not by the local peasants, but by those who are in charge, by the powerful, by the affluent. He goes on, are they not the ones dragging you in court? Economically powerful, the use of the legal system. Verse 7, here's sort of the summary. This is the punch in the gut. Are they not the ones who are slandering the noble name of him to whom you belong? Now, what James is saying is you look at from a class perspective, and just look at the wealthy compared to the poor, to the knowledgeable as well as to the contrast to the simple. Most of this category are blasphemers. Not all, there are certainly exceptions. And praise God, there's exceptions in here. You should thank God. Not that you are rich, but that you are rich and God chose you. The exceptions, which there are few, but as a far majority of those who compose the blasphemers, and the majority of those who are coming to Christ are those who are associated with his glorious name. And he's tying them in. Which side are you going to be on? Because you can pick your teams. And he's drawn it clearly, either those who slander, or those who love God, in verse 5. Now, I said this last week, and it's worth bringing it back in. What is the underlying motivation for why people like you and me, now most of us in here are middle class. There's not a lot of poor people in here, and there's not a lot of rich people in here. Most of you are just kind of in that middle layer. Now, what would cause us, and we are sort of stuck in the middle, because it's easy to look down our noses, and it's easy to fawn after the wealthy. And we really want wealthy friends. We want wealthy people in the church. And, poor people, yeah, come on in. And what do they need? Are they using the church to get something? And there's always kind of this little bit derogatory, a little bit looking down. It's in our nature as middle-class people. It's where our society treats the upper and lower class, those of us in the middle. Now, what is the reason? What would cause us to want to fawn over the rich and to sort of tolerate the poor? And I think I've narrowed it down to two reasons, and I said last week it's the two sides of the same coin. I think the first side is because of pride. We would like to be in that class. We would like to have a little more money, a little more influence, a little more power, a little more acceptance, a little more popularity. And so we think that by association, maybe we can get some of that. If not, people will think we are, and we can at least feel like we're in the right side of the crowd. And so there's a pride element. And there's also a fear element. And fear is just the other side of the coin, because in one sense I'm afraid I don't want to be marginalized on this end, because I know how I think about people beneath me, and I don't want them thinking that. But I'm also afraid that I won't have the resources I need unless I associate with the rich and powerful. As I said last week, churches are very susceptible to that. We think we have to have the millionaires in order to build buildings. We have to have the wealthy people in order to accomplish the things we want to accomplish and the resources. Instead of trusting God, we fawn over those who we think have means and make a big deal. Churches do that all the time. If you don't think they do, believe me, they do. And the tendency to do that, instead of seeing all people in the same eyes that God sees, it's a fear thing. I don't trust God. And so I'm going to put my trust in somebody who I think has power and money and resources. Now, the very last tag there, and I love that, he says, you belong to him. He's reminding them of not only their security, but their source. That you do not need to fear acceptance. You've been accepted by the only one that matters. You don't need to be feared about being intolerated because the one who has chosen you is the only one that matters. And you don't need to worry about provision. You don't need to worry about your sources. If God wills it, he provides it. If God chooses to use you, he's going to do it out of faith, not because you've made the right connections necessarily. And so he deals with that. And I put here just as a summary, it does not make sense to impress those who would oppress you. That's what I put in your notes. It does not make sense to impress those who would impress you. Now, I want to part with just over time is running out, so let me give you 3 quick applications here. And you may not have room in your bulletin if you want to write them down on the side or the margins. Let me give them to you briefly here. Number 1, I would say to you, reflect God's heart for those in need. Reflect God's heart. In other words, when you see someone who is different than you and whom society would even marginalize or place beneath you, refuse to do that. See him as God sees it. Either God's chosen them, they're your brother in Christ, or God may be in the process of bringing them to himself, and you need to love them and treat them in that way. When I think of someone like Zacchaeus, who, by the way, Zacchaeus was a very wealthy man. If you remember the story, some of you don't know it, but there's a story about a man named Zacchaeus who was very wealthy, but he was a crook, he was a cheat. And Jesus chose him. Jesus said, you come down, I'm going to your house today. And God changed his heart. And the first thing he did, he began to treat with respect and dignity and to repay those whom he had marginalized and cheated and abused. You see a wonderful change of heart. If you're wealthy here today, you should thank God that he chose you in spite of your wealth. And you should reflect that and choose that by treating those beneath you who have less means than you through the eyes of God. Second bullet here, just another summary. Find a way to serve those in need. Find a way. If you are not helping someone who has less means than yourself, you need to start making a plan today. Make a plan. I found it interesting when the Apostle Paul is writing the letter to the Galatians in Galatians 3. He said, I met up with Peter, James, and John. Heard of the big 3? Peter, James, and John. Peter said, I met them. And you know what they said to me? You know what Peter, James, and John said when they met Paul? Don't forget, take care of the poor. That's what he said. Of all the things Peter, James, and John said to Paul, they said, hey, don't forget the poor. That's where the heart of God is. Do something for the poor. We provide opportunities here. Not as many as we should, but we do. Once a month, it's an organized schedule thing. We do go and feed the homeless at Church in the Park. If you're in a small group, most of you have done that in small groups. We do a rotation. Something easily to get involved with. If you're not in a small group, you can go. You can show up. You can befriend. You can serve food. You can help cook on Saturdays. There's a way to get involved. I know every Saturday morning there's a group of Here from Grace that go to the Church in the Park area and do an adopt-a block. And they minister and they pray and they talk to those who are hurting and impoverished and in need. We have a food pantry here that, praise God, is being used. This is interesting. Our food pantry is being used so much that someone, I don't even know who it was, brought a concern to the staff and said, hey, I wonder if we should limit this because people are just using the food all the time. And I thought about it for about 2 seconds and I said, man, empty it out. Clear them out. Let them take the food. I mean, these aren't bankers and surgeons coming in. These are people hurting. Come in, let them take the food. If it empties, we'll ask you and you fill it back up. Participating in that. We do a benevolent offering once a month. We'll take a benevolent offering next month. You can do that. You know that for what you spend on pizza every month, you can support a child in a developing country. There's places like Compassion International where you can adopt a child and make sure they have food and schooling and make sure they're having contact with people who have the gospel of Jesus Christ for about $30-something a month. That's pizza money. You can do that. At Christmas time, we make a big deal about the single mom Christmas, and we do different benevolent activities in different times of the year. And we can provide some as a church, but you need to infuse a little creativity, a little bit of initiative on your part. What am I doing, personally, you sitting in the pew, doing to help someone who has less means than you? A third thing, last one. We should, as a church, this is collectively, prioritize our evangelistic outreach. If the poor frequently respond to the gospel, that's where we need to put most of our efforts. That's where we need to put